On the bus ride, I was fully taken over by the large yellow and green fields spreading across the land, far into the horizon, with just a few trees sprinkled here and there. Denmark is almost bidimensional when it comes to landscapes, yet there is a simplicity and order to it that makes my soul breathe and simply relax. People are laid back, respectful, and enjoy the peaceful lifestyle. You can sense it all over the countryside, as well as in the large cities like Aarhus. While Copenhagen is the country's bee's hive, it is nevertheless calm and spacious. I feel at ease everywhere in Denmark, simply because by now it has become a valuable and dear part of my soul. And somehow I feel it's mutual, as if there is this invisible field that always embraces and takes care of me with a sunny and aloof smile. There is a force about it that easily casts away unnecessary mental stimulation, doubts, and especially the volcanic emotional merry-go-round. In this subtle space, my mind settles and I can finally see the bigger picture. From a certain perspective, it can feel distant and cold, but more than that, it feels aired. You can simply think clearly and enjoy the nature and the small richness of this country, while admiring its people, make the best of the little that they have, simply because they envision it. The rhythm is slowed down and everything is following an inner clock where things are done in a leisurely pace. The more I meditate on it, the more I dive into the calm self-reassurance inherited from the Viking ancestors. There was cruelty originally, which is what perhaps has now dimmed into a certain coldness and detachment. But there was even more so courage and strategy, prioritizing success as a natural lifestyle. And this is where the Danish Egregore begins to speak. If you have watched the previous video, you have an idea about what an egregore is. An invisible collective field that a people, a land, a lineage generates across centuries. It is a living inheritance, an entity held in the nervous systems, the architecture, the silences, and the instinctive habits of a people, created by the people. And every nation carries one. The Danish Egregore is one of the most quietly powerful I have ever personally moved through. And I say personally deliberately because the only national souls I am speaking about in this series are the ones I have lived inside of or have been irresistibly drawn to and deliberately plugged myself into. Denmark, Romania, Japan, and lately Korea. These are the worlds that shape me, one way or another. What you will hear in this episode is equally research and transmission. The Danish Egregore has a particular quality that sets it apart. It is horizontal in its social architecture, and yet it produces a quality of inner clarity that is in essence deeply vertical. This tension between the flattening of the collective and the extraordinary inner composure of the individual is, I believe, the central teaching hidden inside this national soul. In other traditions, sacred landscapes are vertical. Mountains, spires, the reaching up of everything toward heaven. In Japan, it is Fuji. In Romania, it is the Carpathians, rising sharply from the plains, as if the earth is remembering something it meant to say. Denmark does not do this. Denmark is wide. It opens in every direction at once. The sky in Jutland is not above you, it is around you, as vast and present as the land itself. This is a landscape that does not ask you to ascend, it asks you to settle, to become, in the most practical sense, grounded. There is something profoundly underestimated about a flat land. The eye is not guided toward a peak. It must learn to be at rest where it stands. And in that restfulness, something in the mind goes quiet in a way that is very difficult to achieve through effort. The Danish Egregore does this as a gift. It removes the urgency, the ambient noise of ambition, of comparison, of the volcanic inner turmoil that so many of us carry. It does not sustain itself easily here. There is no dramatic terrain to feed it. Rather than mere emptiness, it is clarity. The Norse people who first read this landscape named this quality in one of their highest gods, Odin. He was not primarily a god of victory. He was a seeker of hidden knowledge, a traveler, a figure who valued wisdom above comfort and was willing to sacrifice greatly in pursuit of it. His famous act was to offer one eye at Mimir's well to surrender one way of seeing entirely in exchange for a deeper one, rather than to gain more of the same sight. The physical eye perceives surfaces. The inner eye penetrates to what is actually there. What a Danish landscape does quietly, in its own unhurried way, is precisely this. It removes one mode of perception, the urgent, the reactive, the volcanic, and in the space that opens, something else becomes available. I know this from the inside. Living in this subtle field for almost 20 years, I have watched it work on me in ways I could not have engineered through spiritual practice alone. It taught me to see life outside the drama I had carried from other worlds, other soils, other skies, other collective inheritances, where intensity is the currency of feeling alive. Here, the currency changed. Calmness took over. The clear mind, unhurried and wide, became the instrument through which I could finally read what was actually happening in my work, in my relationships, in my own inside. Odin paid with an eye. I paid with ears. I consider it an excellent exchange. To understand the Danish Egregore, you must be willing to go all the way back, past the hygge and the cycling commuters and the celebrated work-life balance, to the people who seeded these fields with their blood and their fire, the Vikings. The Vikings are endlessly romanticized, and I have no interest in adding to that particular pile of mythology. What interests me is something more precise. What quality of spirit had to be cultivated in order to survive in this landscape, in this climate, in these conditions? The North Sea coastline is not gentle. The Jutland Peninsula, where Danish history was seeded, is exposed on both sides to some of the most demanding weather in Northern Europe. Long winters, limited resources, a land that offers enough but never in excess. There were people who had to be practical before they could be anything else. Strategy was not a luxury. Courage was not a virtue reserved for the exceptional. It was simply the baseline requirement for being alive. What this seeded into the collective field, into the egregore that has been accumulating ever since, is something very specific, a relationship to challenge that is neither dramatic nor defeated, a calm, almost offhand willingness to do what needs to be done in a balanced, simple pace, a trust in practical intelligence over emotional performance. together with an unequaled understanding and application of freedom. The cruelty that history records, the conquests, the violence, was the shadow expression of this force, I believe. Raw power, without the tempering of inner development, tends toward aggression. This is true of all peoples, all eras, all egos. But what happens to that force across centuries once the outer battles diminish? It actually transforms. In the Danish case, it became something quite remarkable, as I see it, a cultural relationship to achievement that is quiet, consistent, and entirely uninterested in spectacle. Here, I need to introduce something that cannot be avoided when speaking of the Danish soul, because it is perhaps its most famous and most misunderstood element, or at least one of them. In 1933, a Norwegian-Danish novelist named Axel Sandemos codified what he called Janteloven, the law of Jante, as a satirical portrait of the social conformity he had experienced in Jutland. 10 laws, beginning with "You shall not think you are anything special," continuing through variations of the same essential message. Do not elevate yourself above the collective. Do not imagine your achievement place you above others. Do not think you know more. Do not think you are better. It was written as a social critique, and yet, as one writer recently noted, these laws have persevered in the Danish national consciousness, in the Danish soul, precisely because within them lies both the truth about who the Danes are and some perhaps unfashionable views. Because after all, and I want you to sit with this rather than dismiss it, there is a genuine wisdom buried inside the leveling impulse. Even when the leveling is clumsily applied, the teaching hidden inside the Janteloven, read spiritually as I'm looking at things rather than socially, is this: the ego's achievements are not the measure of a human being. The self, assembled from status, comparison, performance, is a borrowed self. It is not worth elevating because it is not in truth what you are, who you are. The Danes are not generally offering this as spiritual philosophy. At its worst, Janteloven functions as a collective mechanism for suppressing individual brilliance, punishing those who dare to be exceptional, and maintaining a social average that is comfortable rather than alive. This is the shadow. And it has real costs, but at its best, and this is what I find genuinely remarkable about the Danish Egregore, the refusal to elevate the performed self creates a social atmosphere in which people do not need to perform. The pressure of comparison drops a little, at least. The exhausting business of demonstrating your worth over others to a watching crowd simply relaxes. And in that relaxation, something much quieter and much more real becomes possible. The space where the mind settles and you can finally see the bigger picture. That space that I described feeling on the bus is related to this. A collective field shaped by centuries of not needing to prove yourself leaves room for a quality of inner composure that is genuinely rare. The world discovered hygge about a decade ago, and what the world received was a heavily commercialized version involving candles and expensive blankets. This is, to use a Danish turn of phrase, not quite the point. Hygge refers to a form of everyday togetherness, a pleasant and highly valued everyday experience of safety, equality, personal wholeness, and a spontaneous social flow. It is more than an aesthetic. It is a quality of presence, a way of being with other people and with oneself that carries the warmth of genuine contact rather than the performance of warmth. And here is what strikes me as spiritually significant. The origins of hygge can be traced back to the Vikings, an era where people who lived in a harsh, cold climate, where winter nights were long and dark, who developed a deep reverence for nature and the simple pleasures of life, finding comfort in the warmth of the fire, the soft glow of candlelight, and the company of loved ones. This is the Viking force transformed. The same people who faced the North Sea with courage found inside the long darkness of winter a practice of radical inner warmth. The outward battle became an inward sanctuary. The courage that once expressed itself as conquest turned inward and became the courage to simply be present, together, to be still, to allow connection without agenda. Hygge is what happens when a warrior culture learns to rest without going to sleep. It is alertness without tension. And it is, in my direct experience, one of the most underestimated spiritual technologies on earth. As Make Viking, CEO of the Happiness Research Institute in Copenhagen, had said, hygge is a defining feature of cultural identity and an integral part of the national DNA. What freedom is to the Americans, hygge is to Danes. And if Freyr, the god of peace, harvest, and the seasonal turning, gives hygge its mythic root, the warrior's rest earned through surviving the dark, then it is his twin sister, Freya, who gives it its depth. In the Nordic pantheon, Freya is one of the most remarkable presences, a goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, yes, but equally of war, death, and prophetic magic. She claimed half of all warriors who fell in battle. She traveled freely between worlds in a falcon-feathered cloak. She was never domesticated, never reduced to a single register of femininity. She was, in the truest sense of the vocabulary that I use in my writing or in this YouTube channel, entirely self-possessed. This is close to what I recognize in Danish women and in what this land, this nation has cultivated in me, has shaped my own femininity. Actually, more like help me recognize my own femininity. The feminine that Denmark carries is different from the feminine of compliance and careful accommodation. It is the feminine of a woman who knows what she is, who she is, who does not require permission to occupy her full dimensions, who can be warm and direct in the same time without experiencing any contradiction between the two. She is strong, vital, courageous, less the princess archetype, more the heroine who has already faced the thing that was supposed to stop her, and she kept walking. And in the most honest parts of myself, the parts that Denmark helped clarify and strengthen within me over almost 2 decades, I recognize her. There is one figure in Danish history who, I believe, understood the spiritual potential hidden inside the Danish Egregore more clearly than anyone else. His name is Grundtvig, and if you have never heard of him, I ask you to stay here with me, because what he understood in the 19th century carries direct relevance to what we are exploring in this series of videos about national egregores inspired by BTS. Arirang album. Grundtvig was a pastor, a theologian, a poet, historian, and a political thinker whose revolutionary ideas helped lay the foundation for the modern Danish society. What made him remarkable was not the breadth of his knowledge, but the direction of his attention. He turned toward the people, the ordinary people, the farmers of Jutland who carried inside them, in their songs and their stories and their practical wisdom, the living spiritual heritage of the nation. He saw Christianity and Norse mythology as complementary forces in shaping the Danish spirit, and his historical writings celebrated the Viking Age as a source of inspiration and pride. He was not trying to choose between the old roots and the new faith. He understood intuitively what I am articulating in this series, that a living field carries multiple layers simultaneously, and that the work of consciousness is not to erase the earlier layers, but to integrate them harmoniously. His greatest practical contribution, as I understand it, was the folk high school, a model of education not for the elite, but for the people themselves. He took the German concept of Bildung and wanted it for the people, the peasants. Bildung is about the lifelong process of self-cultivation, personal formation, and moral maturation. It involves developing your mind, heart, and character to become a responsible, free, and empathic member of society. It is about who you become as a human being, basically. What Grundtvig did is that he democratized Bildung, speaking of folk Bildung and folk enlightenment. The idea was radical and simple at once. Wisdom is not the exclusive property of those who can afford its institution. It lives in the people. It needs only to be witnessed and cultivated. This too is hidden inside the Danish Egregore. The egalitarianism that Janteloven expresses clumsily, Grundtvig expressed beautifully. Every human being carries something worth listening to. Not because everyone is identical in wisdom or development, but because the spark that matters, the living, breathing connection to something deeper than social status and position in the hierarchy of the society, is not distributed according to the rank. There is a third God whose presence moves through this egregore in a way that is impossible to miss once you know where to look, and that is Thor. He matters here more because of something historically precise and spiritually significant than because of what popular culture and movies has made of him. Throughout the Viking Age, while Odin was the god of kings, warriors, and poets, the god of the chosen, the initiated, the elite, Thor championed the farming freemen who constituted the majority of the population, the ordinary people, the ones who worked the land, built the halls, sailed the ships, and asked nothing more than to live and die with dignity. They wore his hammer, Mjolnir, as an amulet, not as a symbol of personal domination, but as a sign that divine strength was available to them directly, without intercession, without rank, without requiring them to be anything other than what they already were. The hammer was not an ego symbol, it was a spirit symbol. The power it represented was not the power of conquest, but the power of protection. Godly strength held in the hands of an ordinary person as something natural and inalienable. This is the archetype that Grundtvig, centuries later, translated into the language of education and democracy. The living encounter with spirit is the birthright of the farmer's son, no less than the bishop's son. The peasant's knowing, no less sacred than the scholar's parchment. and the transition from monarchy to democracy that Denmark navigated with relative grace, without revolution, without mass bloodshed, carries the fingerprint of this same understanding. A people who had always known, somewhere in their collective bones, that godly strength belongs to the spirit within the person, not to the title above their name. There is an unmistakable figure I want to bring into this, a legendary one, and in some ways the most telling of all. Since the 13th century, Holger Danske, the sleeping Viking warrior set to rest beneath Kronborg Castle, has been a symbol of Danish national pride, a story told in every Danish household and taught in every Danish upbringing. The legend holds that he is not dead, merely sleeping, and that when Denmark faces its gravest hour, he will awake. The nationalist mythology does not interest me here much. I'm interested in the spiritual archetype. Every tradition carries some version of this figure, the great power that has not yet been called upon, the sleeping force within the collective that ordinary circumstances do not require, and that only genuine crisis or genuine invitation can summon. In the Hindu tradition, it is Kundalini, the coiled serpent at the base of the spine, waiting. In the Danish national imagination, it is a Viking warrior resting in the dark beneath a castle facing the sea. What does it mean that this is the figure at the heart of the Danish Egregore? It means the force is not fully expressed. It means what you encounter in Denmark's gentle, ordered bicycle riding, hygge-loving everyday life is the surface expression of something considerably deeper and more powerful than it currently appears. The courage has not gone away. It is resting, and it is worth calling upon through consciousness rather than crisis. Every national soul that I am going to approach and discuss and share my experience and its impact on me in this video series is offering something specific to the ascending human. The Romanian soul, which is my native soul, offers the fierce, dark-rooted aliveness that comes from a people who have survived everything and still cannot and will not be conquered by external forces, even if they are constantly draining its richness. The Japanese soul offers the rigor of honor, order, and dignity, the cultivation of mastery as a spiritual practice. The Korean soul offers the courage to break generational silence and habits through resilience and the joy of life, despite collective suffering and longing. So what does the Danish soul offer? As I see it, it offers clarity without drama. It offers the capacity to set down the volcanic emotional merry-go-round, not by suppressing what you feel, but by finding the part of you that was never swept away to begin with, the part that can stand in a wide open field and breathe and look at the horizon and simply know what matters, what is relevant, and act towards that. In a world that is increasingly loud, increasingly urgent, increasingly addicted to intensity as proof of meaning, as proof of existence, the Danish Egregore holds something radical, in my opinion. The quiet conviction that a life well lived does not need to announce itself. That courage can be practical, not in your face. That contentment is not complacency, but a sophisticated achievement. That the best decision is often made not in a state of fired up passion, but in a settled, unhurried clarity of a highly intelligent mind that has been given enough stillness to see. This is what I feel when I move through this land. The mind finally given enough room to do what it does best when left undisturbed. And there is a teaching inside that for each of us on a personal level, not just as a cultural observation, but as an actual practice. The question the Danish Egregore poses directly is this: where in your life are you generating drama as a substitute for clarity? Where are you producing intensity or seeking intensity or are unable to decide or make an action because there is no intensity? Where in your life are you doing this? Because you have not yet found your way to stillness. And what would become possible? What decision? What direction? What relationship? If you stopped and let your mind settle long enough to actually see. I said at the beginning that Denmark feels mutual, as if the field always embraces me with a sunny yet aloof smile. I want to close there because I think this is the most intimate and truest thing I know about this egregore. A field shaped by people who learn to be at ease with what they have, who build warmth into their winters and quiet courage into their daily choices, who refuse to make spectacle the measure of worth. That field does not demand much from you when you enter it. If anything, it simply educates and shapes you accordingly. There is a force here that is easy to miss if you are moving too fast, or if you are focusing on the material comfort or the well-being society system that is very well developed here. But if you slow down and if you let your rhythm follow an inner clock rather than an external one, you will feel it. It will settle you. It will clarify inside you. And it will hand you back to yourself. And that, I believe, is the most amazing gift I was given by living here. If anything in this video was relatable to you, please share in the comments your experience. Let's spirit.